keep anybody on this beautiful day. Far nicer than the last time we were up here. My name's Aaron Robb. I'm principal of Wahconah Regional High School. I'm here on behalf of our superintendent, Lori Kasda, who could not be here for this particular session. And I'm one of the members of the Wahconah School Building Committee. We have an agenda up here that's pretty tight, and definitely we want to spend as much time as possible breaking out with small group discussions. The big idea tonight regarding the Wahconah School Building Project is to keep getting community input. We were up here one other night in the spring, and we actually it was in the winter time, and we received a great deal of feedback from Windsor and Covington folks. We're doing that again tonight. We're also going to be spending time in Dalton tonight at Wahconah, and on Thursday night we'll be visiting the Beckett, Washington folks, and also the Pruitt, Hinsdale folks, getting feedback from them as well. We do have representatives from our design team, DRA. Carl Franchetti is here, along with Vladimir over here. We've got John here, and they've got a lot of insight regarding the design schematics and that sort of thing with our building project. We also have John Benziger, who is our owner's project manager from Skanska, and we've been working very closely with them in basically preparing and narrowing down possible design schemes, but also the educational planning that goes into the building project as well. So what I'm going to do is turn things over to Carl, who will be doing the bulk of the speaking tonight, at least leading into this, but we really ultimately would like to get to the point where we hear from you as a small group before you go. So with that, Carl, it's all yours.
Okay. Just to remind folks, those are all the members of this very competent building committee here. You can see a few from Windsor here, but the idea is that obviously every community is represented, and if you have thoughts later on, feed them through those folks if you know them, or you can go to the administration. But we definitely are looking for feedback along the way, and tonight's one way that we'll hope to achieve that. We do want to mention one other partner here is the MSBA. Those initials stand for Massachusetts School Building Authority. They are partners in this because they'll end up funding a good portion of the cost of whatever project comes out of this ultimately, and they are sponsoring a portion of this feasibility study phase as well. And just to sort of put things in context as to where we are in this, there are three main parts to this first feasibility schematic design process. We've already completed the first part, submitting the preliminary design program that's mainly focused on education. That's really what drives these projects. We're doing this to improve the educational environment for those students, to deal with any facilities issues as well. But so we have looked at the educational program, we've looked at existing conditions, and in that stage we developed a host of alternatives, up to 13 or 14 different alternatives. We'll share some of those with you tonight. But we're in the phase now where we're trying to narrow it down to get to a preferred alternative. They call it preferred schematic in their lingo, but ultimately we want to get to one option. And you'll see tonight around the room there are still 5 or 6 options on the table that we're discussing, and we'll share those with you. In September, we'll be turning in the next submission to the state to address these couple of things, to update the educational plan if there's been any changes or tweaking to that. We'll share with them the evaluation we've done to show them how we got to the preferred alternative. And then the third phase of this would be wrapped up in February when we actually develop that one alternative in more detail so that we can do a very accurate cost estimate. We'll understand the exact scope of the project, the schedule of the project, and then that is when we would take it to the voters, and we would get the approval from the MSBA board, targeted for the April board meeting, and then seek regional approval from the whole district in the spring.
Is that a typo on the February? Should it be 2019?
Oh, you're right. Good pick. Thank you for that. We'll correct it. 2019. And this is a regional vote it will be set up so that the vote actually occurs simultaneously in all the towns at the same time, seeking approval of the project when the time comes.
Is it a town-by-town approval?
No, it's a collective vote, and 51% is needed collectively for all the towns. And there'll be a lot more of these kinds of presentations between now and then too, so that we can explain all that and go over that as well. So just briefly, that first phase, there was a lot of discussion at that time too, these kinds of meetings where we filled the current library media center at Wahconah to do some visioning. We'll do that similarly tonight in a format later, the second half of this evening, and break into smaller groups that we can have a little more of a tabletop, better kind of discussion, recording things on pads as to what is important to you and what issues we might have missed or need to emphasize. And we want to keep this little diagram in mind here that, as I said, it's really the education plan that drives this project, that we've developed options. We want to go over the criteria used to evaluate those options so that we do it in a very objective fashion and try to take sort of the emotion out of it, and then get to a short list where we can narrow it down to one particular option that we develop into the project. We've also met extensively with individual teachers and administrators at the school too, and gotten their feedback about what's working for them now, what's not working, what they'd like to do maybe differently than they do now, and so forth. So we've had opportunities to do that as well. And some of the things that came out of the educational plan, this was kind of a key statement. We thought that represents a lot about what Wahconah High School is about. That it does have a very broad sort of set of offerings. There are a lot of opportunities there that you would see typically at a larger school, but it does have a small school kind of feel. And that's kind of one guiding principle moving forward. These were some other ones that came up in various categories about issues and sort of key principles that we want to keep in mind as we move forward. A couple of ones you might see: this student engagement. The environment can help create that. A lot of these issues are not solely dependent on the environment. We recognize that. We're architects. We can influence certain part of the environment, but teachers and families and students themselves, obviously are a great part of what happens in schools and how effective teaching and learning can be. But some of the key words here, bringing the school into the 21st century in terms of methodologies, which include things like doing projects, not just sitting in rows and listening to teachers lecture, but actually gathering around in small groups and working on projects that maybe are interdisciplinary. It's not just subject by subject. So again, the environment can help affect a lot of these issues which were enumerated in the educational plan. A couple other parts of that plan were more spatial, you might say, in their outcome. One of the notions was that there was a desire to organize the building not in straight corridors necessarily with similar classrooms lining both sides of the hallways, but in more clustered kind of organizations where there might be some of this so-called collaborative space. You might think of it as an alcove off of the corridor, surrounded by classrooms of different sizes, some smaller, some bigger, and even with an adjacent science lab. So not all the science rooms are together in the building, for instance. They want to be decentralized and be part of these clusters, and then having a teacher planning space related to each individual cluster is a way. One of the goals is to take the given enrollment of 460 students and break it down into groupings of say 100 to 125 each. That's a good planning number to use, and that's what this diagram represents. And if you were to take those clusters and sort of put them together now to make a whole school, and again, this is just what we might call an adjacency diagram. It's not really meant to be a floor plan, but it shows that the clusters are gathered, centered around a learning commons, which is kind of the 21st century evolution of a library. in the center of that academic area. And then on the, you might say, the other side of the building where these larger spaces are, the gym and locker rooms, the auditorium and music rooms, there's a student commons, which again is sort of an evolution of the cafeteria. It's not just for serving lunch, it is a kind of gathering space. It's occupied from before school to well after school into the evening. It really becomes kind of the central organizing element of this part of the building. It's important that there be a main entrance with control for safety and security adjacent to the admin area. These are all points that were emphasized as part of the educational plan. And the notion was that this plan would guide us regardless of whether we end up doing an addition renovation to the school or a new school. That the same principles are the targets, the objectives in either case. So now to look at one other aspect that we considered was this, we analyzed the existing school. This is a floor plan of the existing school as to how well the existing spaces today are meeting either current standards or guidelines for each of the spaces. And the color coding is kind of a simplistic way of doing it so you can immediately see it graphically. Red are spaces that are undersized or deficient in some way. They don't meet current standards. Green are ones that do meet current standards. And yellow are the ones that are kind of marginal. In a renovation, the yellow spaces may be allowed to remain, but the red ones would really need to be addressed to be part of a substantial renovation. And several of these are science rooms. Those are ones that are significantly below today's standards. And some of these are general classrooms. They just happen to be on the small side here. You'll notice the gym, it's certainly, the basketball court is a legitimate basketball court, but the overall size of the gym could be larger. The cross courts, when there's practice going on and two teams are trying to practice simultaneously, those cross courts are not full size. They're compromised in order to fit into a space there. That's why that's color-coded red.
Question.
Yes, sir.
Going back
I'll go back to that. Yeah.
How can a classroom size is a function of the number of students in it?
It is, but that's one of those areas where the state does have guidelines.
I mean, if there's only 10 students in one of those red classrooms, that classroom's not big enough.
It is, and that's one of the points we're carrying forward into the new space program, is to say, when we looked at the whole curriculum, there are a certain number of classes that have only 10, 12, maybe up to 15 students, and smaller classrooms would be sufficient. And we've actually put that into the program.
And more desirable because it's the size.
Exactly. But for what the state would call general classrooms or interchangeable classrooms, where the enrollment might vary, from 16 up to 25 to even 30, they do need to be at least 825 square feet. So that's the standard that we were measuring against, because it is one of the few standards that the state has in terms of sizes. Other things are called guidelines, but for classrooms, they're actually, for science labs and general classrooms, they do have minimum sizes. So we have to convince them that Wahconah has enough of those smaller enrolled classes that leaving some small spaces would make sense. We're with you in that regard.
And it would seem to me that if you have a smaller classroom, then you have more the teacher-student ratio is more beneficial.
It is. And as long as the district can afford that many teachers, that's wonderful. That it is great to have that kind of ratio.
Another question on the pods.
Yeah.
I guess you call them pods.
Clusters or pods, yeah.
Are these mixed grade pods? Are they, because you got the AP people, you got the middle people, and you got the low achiever people. Are you starting to track in order to put these pods together? So that
One of the ideas that came out of the visioning sessions was the school should be flexible. That's one of the other guiding principles. And so one of the flexibility notions here is that this could be organized by grade. That doesn't seem to be the way the school wants to go right now, but it could be 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, although we know a lot of classes are mixed grades. It could be department, the way the school is organized right now, although the science rooms are not all together, but still those could all be English classrooms, those could all be history classrooms. the idea is that they could change over time. This could be a STEM focused, 9 through 12 students, not tracked by grade, but by concentration. And another might be more college prep or general academics, another might be more humanities based or something like that. So the idea is that there's enough flexibility in those layouts that they could change over time. And the school could evolve from the way it's organized today in departments to something that maybe we don't even know, but in the future might be academies or some different kind of organization.
So you envision students transitioning during the day from one spot to the other?
Yes, it's very unlikely that they'd spend their whole day in one cluster. That the scheduling would be very tough to work out that necessarily, but it is possible. And with more project-based learning, students might spend more time. Classes might not be 45 or 50 minutes. They might be an hour and 45 minutes. And so therefore there's less movement in the building also. So you could spend more time in one area.
And one of the complaints that I got from my 4 kids is, that have gone through this, is that the hallways are a traffic jam.
They are.
And it's essentially impossible to get from one class to the other at one time if you're ever into the building. And the other issue is the cafeteria is not big enough, and maybe it doesn't need to be big enough to hold the entire student body at one time, so that everybody sits down together.
Yeah, that's a luxury to have a cafeteria that large, where you have just one seating for lunch.
Yeah.
The standard is 3 seatings. Some schools choose to do 2. That way nobody's class is divided in half. You have middle lunch. Teachers tend not to like that. It really breaks up the flow of things. We are planning this as the 3 lunch shift right now. And there are enough classes that can deal with the middle lunch to make that tenable, but that does sort of economizes on the size of the building.
But if you did it for 2, if you designed it for a 2-lunch program and the population increased by 50%.
You could expand it to 3 without expanding the physical space. You're right. Yep. There was a question here too.
First of all, there's no class that can do the split lunch. Sorry. So my first criticism is it should be designed for 2 lunches. But you made the observation about the class size standards. The public should be aware that those standards are inflexible and were designed for average schools, which is average size schools is 1,500 to 2,000, whereas we're designing a school ridiculously for 450.
Doug, where's that data from, the average being 1,500 to 2,000?
That's state data. Because the average size, the median size school in Massachusetts is, not Massachusetts, nationally is in the 1,500. Small schools are, 1,200 and over large schools.
But that's not the case in Massachusetts. There's
No.
a preponderance of high schools that are 300 to 700 students. That's probably the norm in the state.
Which is a problem. In any case, the point I'm making is the state regulations do not make adjustments for small schools.
That's exactly the argument we're making when we suggested, see what's labeled seminar here? That's what, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Jim. What Jim had mentioned about classes that have only 10 to 15 or 16 students, that's the room they would use. And when we do the overall classroom count, we're counting on that to be a scheduled room just for that reason. And we're hoping that the state understands and allows that kind of variation. Otherwise, we'd end up with all classrooms the same size, which are not very flexible. We think the most flexible thing you can do is have a variety of space sizes, because then you have more options that way. That's a good point. But there are definitely challenges with a school this size, economically and space-wise, that we face. Well, hopefully, as was pointed out, educationally, hopefully there's a benefit. There's a better teacher-student ratio sometimes, and a better interpersonal relationship where the principal can know every single student's name, and the department heads can know all their teachers well, and that sort of thing. So we did that space analysis. There's sort of some of the deficiencies we mentioned. I think we've talked about them already. that were identified. And likewise, we did a physical evaluation of all these components to the building. And some of the things that were noted, there are many systems. This building is approaching 60 years old. There are many systems that are still original in that building. Some of the windows most of the windows are still original, although they've tried to add storms to help insulation, but it's still a very leaky, poor envelope that doesn't really meet anywhere near today's energy efficiency standards as an envelope. That would need to be improved. There are some masonry issues. There's still some modular classrooms being used. Those don't have a lifespan anywhere near what the building should have, and so forth. There's also some finishes inside that clearly are at the end of their life. These ceilings, some of these floors, the seating and the floors in the auditorium. There are accessibility issues in the school, even though it's a one-story building. As you know, there are a few changes in levels. There are issues in the auditorium. They've tried to be addressed. They would need to be addressed more completely in a full renovation. And there still remains some hazardous materials, some asbestos tile, some insulation that would need to come out as part of a renovation too. In one of the statements that sort of summarizes the mechanical, electrical systems in the building, despite being fairly well maintained, there are a lot of things that are just at the end of their life. It's even hard to get parts to some of these things to keep them going. So some major systems need to be replaced in the building if it were to remain and to carry on into the future. And again, the lifespan that we look at in a project like this is roughly 50 years. So if we were to renovate the school, we'd want to make it, renovate it to the extent that it would last another 50 years without major work. Obviously some finishes wear out faster than that, but for the major components, we'd want to shoot for that, and obviously with new construction, the same. And then, as I mentioned, in the space summary form, this is the last part of the educational plan. We do list, this is what the form looks like, we do list every space in the building, and we list how big is it today, if it exists today, and what's desired, and then these are the state guidelines for some of those spaces. So the state likes to use that as a comparison purpose, although it's not hard and fast, as we said. Especially when we're at an enrollment of 460 students, some of these guideline things don't really make sense, don't really apply at that size. And here's roughly what we're shooting for in that space summary. It's a building of 128,000 square feet right now, programmatically. The existing building is about 114,000. So even though the enrollment is at or below what it is today, because some of those smaller spaces exist and some of these other spaces don't exist that the school would like to have, it does fall a bit short of, the existing building falls short of the sort of idealized size. And these are some of the highlights of what's in that space summary. And so when we say 20 classrooms, both large and small, we have, I think it's 4 of those seminar size rooms and 16 of the general size rooms. So we are accounting for at least 20 to 25% of the classes being that small, being able to make use of those smaller classrooms. So let's focus on the alternatives, and this is really where we'd like your feedback tonight as well. These are the alternatives we looked at. One is called base repair. That's essentially a baseline. That's where the label comes from. A baseline of what would be required to just fix everything that's deficient physically, not educationally, without moving any walls really. Just to improve the envelope, the roof, the windows, all those finishes, the accessibility issues, mechanical electrical systems. That's base repair. The addition renovation options would include base repair. In other words, we need to do all those things and more to then address the educational issues. And we developed 4 addition renovation options, and we developed 9 new construction options. So a total of 13 options there, 14 if you count base repair. And for each of these, we developed sort of conceptual floor plans, a site plan, and thought about phasing. How would the building or the project be implemented in each case? So we used a sort of preliminary set of evaluation criteria, and these are the 13 options in this matrix format. It went spread over 2 pages, but essentially those columns were, how well does it meet the educational program? How well does it meet the goals for the facility and the site? And also, if I go back to one, and how disruptive is it, the implementation, or what is the phasing of implementing that possible solution? So let me show you where, these are the 4 addition renovation options that we looked at. This is a site plan view of the existing building, showing a small addition here, or a small addition there, or an addition, demolition, renovation there, or in this case, a major demolition, saving the gym and auditorium, and an addition there. Those were the 4. You can sort of see they run the spectrum there. And we narrowed it down to these 2 that we'd like to share with you tonight in a little more detail and carry forward in this final phase of evaluation. So they're sort of opposite ends of the spectrum. This is the one that keeps the entire building. It does remove the modulars and adds a new piece of construction at this end of the building. This one obviously keeps only the gym, locker room, auditorium, music spaces, and admin space in the middle, but converts it and builds all new academic areas there. So it's a real shift from the other one. Yes, Jim?
On your evaluation sheets,
Yeah.
one of the columns I think that is missing is operational cost. There's always a
Actually,
trade-off.
we have that in this next phase.
There's always
That's
a
a good
trade-off
point.
between capital expenditure and operation expenditure, and we can,
That's
if
a good
we
point.
spend the capital to bring the operational costs significantly down, we can afford more teachers.
We'll share with you what we've done is not just eliminate some options in this phase, we've also expanded the criteria to evaluate these options, and operational cost is one of them. So we do now have that on our spreadsheet. So here's that first option, just to go through it quickly. It's pretty simple in that it basically adds a band of new construction to sort of complete another courtyard. So now the circulation is in the same pattern. The major change you might say here, or 2 of them, one, we've distributed the science lab. So we have some new ones here, and here. So as per that diagram, we're trying to match that, or map that diagram onto the existing building. So we do get a science lab and adjacent classrooms to sort of get to those clusters of classrooms, both in the new construction and in the existing building. And the other thing is, by taking away one wall here, we can get a little bit of that alcove space off the corners and immediately adjacent to some classrooms, that might be a space that can be used for collaboration, for projects, to give a little flexibility. And the other thing we've introduced is subdividing some of these spaces to get in some of those seminar rooms and small group rooms. So we try to, again, achieve that variety of class sizes. So you can see it's no longer repetitive classrooms all the way down the corridor. There are a variety of sizes in these clusters. But the major components remain in their same space. So the gym, the cafeteria, the auditorium, the library now becomes a learning commons, but they're all in their same locations and would get renovated as part of this option. Here's what it would look like 3-dimensionally, not all that different. Obviously, the site plan would remain basically the same. This addition could be built without encumbering the existing soccer field. There would want to be some improvements to these fields, just physically, but they don't have to be re-laid out. And there would need to be some improvements to this parking lot and pedestrian access into the building and so forth, but relatively minor in this scheme, the scale of things.
Question.
So, I'm sorry, question?
The gymnasium and the auditorium
Yes.
are recognized as being undersized for the size of the school.
The auditorium isn't, the gymnasium is.
So wouldn't this plan require that gymnasium be expanded?
It's not a requirement. That's what we're saying. We can get a varsity basketball court in there. There is one now. It's just one of the lost opportunities in this option. So it's sort of one of the negatives. It's not absolutely required that it be a 12,000 square foot gym. It's currently about 9,300 square feet. you can still, divide it in half. You can still have simultaneous gym classes or practices. It's just that those cross courts are not full size.
But my question is, can't you, in this option, tear out the gymnasium and make it a full-size gymnasium?
You could, but we looked at that as a different sort of option if that were the case. If we were to go to that extreme, it's very hard to expand a gym. You really have to demolish it and rebuild it to keep it column-free and clear span and so forth. And so in this footprint, yes, you could expand it. By that point, we're getting into sort of another family of options. We tried to keep this option the one that most retains the existing building, just to give a variety of options. So in the next option, we do expand here. We actually keep the gym here, but we're obviously building all new academic areas and only keeping the auditorium, music rooms, this connector which gets converted into art rooms, and the gym and locker rooms which get totally renovated. But all new cafeteria, all new library, learning commons, all new academic clusters there. And being at the other end of the spectrum here, there's so much new construction, in a sense, this all can be built while the existing school stays in operation with minimal downtime. There's a little bit of disruption, obviously. The baseball field is out of commission. The parking lot gets a little reconfigured, but the drop-off could still happen in the front. The entrances could still be accessible. These spaces would have to get renovated off hours during summers, particularly there. And it would look like this sort of in the end, or that three-dimensionally. So these academic areas would be two-story to, again, be most efficient in terms of use and be compact. And then once the existing building is demolished, new fields could be installed in that location. So that's what's labeled addition renovation number 4. The new construction options, we looked at basically 6 different locations on the site, and then had some multiple variations of building on a couple of them. So we actually ended up with 9 total options. But the number 1 to 6 represent those 6 locations on the site. So these 4, 5, and 6 are the ones towards the back of the site, towards the middle school, or on the football field there. The ones, number 1 is in front of the school, in the green space where the drop-off area is now. 2 and 3 are off to the side of the gym where the current baseball field and parking lot are. And after our preliminary evaluation of these 9 options, we narrowed it down to these 3 as being the ones most likely, most effective to meet those criteria that we set of looking at the educational plan, looking at the site and facilities sort of utilization, looking at the phasing and implementation of them. We also added a slight variation to this one. You can see this one is kind of an open courtyard, this one's a closed courtyard. So they're really just variations. The site plans are virtually identical of those 2, but we just wanted to carry those 4, so to speak, forward. And just to run through those quickly so you see what they are. The first one, number 1, 1A, is in front of the school. It's follows that educational diagram. This is the academic area on 2 stories. This is the gym, auditorium, commons area, cafeteria on 1 story, but they're high volumes there, so volumetrically they're almost 2 stories high. There's still a drop-off area for buses in the front with some parking for visitors and admin. There's some additional parking here and a larger parking area kind of in the vicinity where the existing parking is. The main entrance for visitors is here, immediately adjacent to admin. Secondary, serving that parking to the east there. North, by the way, is to the left on these plans. And then once the school is removed here, after the new school is occupied, these fields can be built. And because the new footprint is more compact than the existing building, there's actually a net increase in athletic fields, in green space, in these options. And there's what the floor plan looks like. Again, the yellow areas are corridors. So here's the main entrance, and then there's a main corridor that serves these classroom clusters with the learning commons in the middle. And again, these follow those diagrammatic clusters. And then the gym and locker room are here, auditorium and music rooms, kitchen and cafeteria serving the commons area right here. And the main entrance is immediately adjacent to admin and student services in this central block there. Volumetrically, that's what it would look like. And you can see it's fairly close to the existing building. During construction, fortunately this is the gym, so it's pretty much a blank wall there. There is some glass here in the offices. Those would be protected, everything would be fenced in and safely segregated. But because this is sitting on top of where the drop-off area and some of the parking is, necessarily there'd be some temporary parking and a new driveway brought around to the back during construction to allow that construction to go on in the front. And we've done some phasing plans. I won't share all those details with you, but we have thought about how to implement these. The second one, option 2A, is taking those same components but orienting them a little bit differently in kind of a different shape, a little bit more compact footprint. You can see off to the side of the gym, on the parking lot, and partially on the baseball field here. But in this case, the drop-off in the existing school could remain during construction, and this area would be fenced off and during construction. And there's what that footprint would look like. Similar adjacencies: main entrance, admin, student services, the larger spaces on one half of the plan, the academic areas on the other half of the plan, and that half of the plan is 2 stories, centered around the learning commons in the center. And then there's what it would look like 3-dimensionally, again 2 stories, and then high 1-story spaces on the other half of the plan. And then the option is very similar. The only variation is, basically creating an enclosed courtyard where the circulation sort of ties back on itself, and we just rearrange some components of the building here.
Carl, do you want to talk about the orientation?
Yeah, that's true, John. One of the issues that we like to point out, as I said, north is to the left. One of the reasons that we sort of took that footprint and bent it in this direction is to get south exposure for those classrooms. It really, from an environmental point of view, from a natural light point of view, we want to get a majority of the building facing south if we can, or north-south, with a east-west axis for the corridor. So that's one reason that this plan was developed. And then you can see the difference here with the third option. The major corridor is running north-south, so these spacers are facing east and west. It's a little bit of a negative to this plan in terms of controlling heat and glare and taking advantage of southern exposure. But the footprint for this is very similar to the first one. Again, there's the major corridor, but that's now running north-south, so these classroom spaces are facing east and west here.
Is there any consideration of putting solar arrays on the roof?
Yes, there is. On all of these, we expect that they'd be, the most energy efficient, environmentally sensitive that we can develop here. And a lot of these roofs probably will be flat roofs, although again, these are meant to be massing models, don't take them too literally, but they probably will have a fair amount of flat roof that would be suitable to put, PV solar panels on.
Carl, we're shooting for LEED silver for
Yeah,
we're shooting for LEED silver.
and they all will be, if you know that scoring system called LEED, L-E-E-D, these would all be LEED silver, not just LEED certified, but one step up, which is LEED silver, so that they all are a minimum of at least 20% more energy efficient than even the new energy standards that the state building code requires. So the operating costs are certainly going to go down for the heating and ventilating of these buildings compared to the cost today in those buildings. Even after renovating the existing, we'd have a hard time matching, the envelope that we could construct in a new building with a renovated existing building.
One of the things that we looked at in the building committee 10 years ago was putting in geothermal heat pumps.
Yes. Yeah.
One for each classroom, and that way we could also, they act as dehumidifiers, they also act as air conditioning units, and quality of air for recirculation was was on a per classroom basis rather than having giant ductwork.
Yeah.
And that made a lot of sense to us. We took a 1 megawatt solar panels to power all of those heat pumps so that our net energy cost was zero. And I'd like to see.
We've heard that at a few community meetings now. It's definitely on our radar to put, achieving a net zero as a goal here. It takes certain financial commitment to do that. We got to discuss that obviously with the building committee and the community, but it certainly is a worthy goal.
The other question I have is, has the school board had any discussions or negotiations with the city of Pittsfield? Size matters.
Sure.
A 450 student school can provide only a certain number of programs. A 900 can provide more.
Coincidentally, one of our criteria that we're using, these are the new criteria. You can see it's much expanded. Let me get that back. It's much expanded from the original list, but potential expansion for any of these options should be evaluated and when we try to evaluate these various options. Because yes, we understand demographics may be on the decline in general, but regionalization may be a factor in the future that it's prudent for any building of this type to think about being able to expand.
Whether it's
students from Pittsfield or your own district students.
Those negotiations should occur before you get too far down the road with this building design.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the train's already left the station in terms of this project.
But there are whistle stops along the way. Before you commit to seeking any money or any further architectural, I'd like to see the school board do its job and try to negotiate with Pittsfield to reduce the load on the taxpayers in these areas.
We should also, like I say, as we get into more specific design, think about the ease and the ability of any of these solutions to be expanded. Yes, sir.
Jake McCandless, the Pittsfield superintendent, was on the radio today.
Mm-hmm.
Tonic.
Yep, we know Jake well. Yes.
The projection for Pittsfield is that they will be losing 1,000 students over the next decade.
Losing?
5,500 to 4,500 students. That means that their high school population will be dropping from 1,700 probably to 1,350. So 950 students at Tonic, that would mean they would have to build a school of 400 to 450 to accommodate the Pittsfield High students. But they're so close to their cap on taxes that they can't afford to do that. It would be ill-advised for Central Berkshire to build a building that could not eventually become a school of 950, because Central Berkshire, meaning Central Berkshire District in Pittsfield, in 10 years will need 2 high schools, Taconic and one other school of 950. And when we came for the first hearings here, I stated that any plan we adopt has to have core facilities adequate to service the student population 950. If you can add classrooms, your gym, your cafeteria, auditorium, your guidance staff areas, you're stuck with. And if we build a building of 460 that doesn't have the capacity to be expanded to 950, we've thrown away the option of working on a regional solution.
We can definitely add that to the list of, one more detailed explanation of what that means, expansion potential. And like you said, designing a cafeteria for 2 lunch shifts so that it could go to 3 in the future is one way to address that space.
Carl, things like this. We have had discussions with Pittsfield. We started about 1.5 years ago. The problem is where we are right now with the MSBA and the fact that if we throw in the towel on this now, we're not going to see it again for another 10 or 20 years.
I think we're talking about just being flexible to expand, not changing the program right now. Right?
That's why you'll see that expansion is one of the elements on the spreadsheet that they put together. With the trade-offs.
But to Doug's point, the gymnasium and the cafeteria and the auditorium need to be sized because you can't expand those. They need to be sized immediately or during the design phase.
the gym is, the auditorium is actually larger than the state will prescribe for the 460. So you might say that's oversized in the program right now. Cafeteria is one that's not right now. It's sized for 3, not 2. That's a discussion that we have with the building committee and with the MSBA about, can we oversize it and get reimbursed for the space?
So even if we can't get reimbursed, we might want to consider it.
That's
Jake was
yeah.
pretty clear
Yeah.
that although you designed Wahconah so they could add to it if
Yeah.
they wanted to make it a single high school, Pittsfield, when offered the option of building a single high school, when Wahconah first went out,
Right.
rejected it.
Yes.
They did not want any school in that community to serve more than 1,000 kids. So he knows that the idea of adding to Wahconah to make it a single high school in Pittsfield will not fly. So, I know the train's left the station as far as those negotiations completely changing the plan. But if all we need to do is tweak the size of the cafeteria
Yeah.
to leave us the option eventually to negotiate with Pittsfield for an addition, I think it would be worse even if we had to pay a little bit more money up front as a district, because long-term, as far as operational costs, as far as educational programming, if you had a school with 900 kids in it, the programming you could offer, it would be a world's better.
Those are all great ideas.
Appreciate that. So these are the other about 8 different categories here, because some of them are somewhat related, but we don't want to lose sight of them. We kept all the words there. And even though you can't read the words here, this is sort of a preliminary evaluation of the various options where, as this spectrum shows, green is good, red is bad, most advantageous, least advantageous, yellow is kind of neutral. So in our preliminary discussions with the building committee and working group, you can see that there's more green towards this end of the spectrum where these are the new construction options. These are the addition renovation options there. Have some advantages, the biggest one being cost right here. That first addition renovation option may be the least expensive construction cost. It may not be the best long-term value though. That's another concept that we introduce here too, to think about, when we mentioned about 50-year lifespans and so forth, and operating costs, that it may not be the and it really, you can see these numbers. These are for comparison purposes only. Please, we haven't developed the plans sufficiently detailed enough to put, more specific costs. That's why they're expressed in ranges. And the reason there are 2 rows here, that the smaller numbers here are construction costs, the larger numbers here are project costs. Project costs includes basically everything in a project, turnkey, so that includes not just the hard costs of construction, the bricks and mortars and concrete and steel, but includes furniture, includes fees, includes contingencies, the borrowing costs, and so forth. So when you think about, project costs, that's all in. And sometimes when people hear about the cost of other schools, they may hear construction costs. And so you got to keep in mind that, and you can see generally this is about 20, 25, sometimes 30% more than construction costs to cover all those other categories. And these are just preliminary. We may, they're based on the current program. That program might change. It may go up a little bit, may go down a little bit as we move through the sequence here. And obviously, as we develop more detailed design and do a little more investigation of the site, we'll be able to get more specific. And certainly, by the time we get down to or get down to the vote next spring, we'll have very precise costs, not just overall costs, but be able to take an approximation of what each town's share of that cost will be. That's, again, it's a hard thing to fix because it does fluctuate with the enrollments from year to year, but at least we can do an estimate there. Yes,
Will that additional detail also show estimated utility costs?
Yes, we'll develop some operating costs. The school on their side will develop operating costs for, salaries, for, a number of teachers, number of staff in the building. They will project those costs. We can project the utility costs for it too. Again, there's some estimations there. Obviously, we don't know exactly how much the school's going to operate, around the clock, around the calendar, and so forth. But we make assumptions and do a projection on utility costs. Yes, Doug.
Does the state reimbursement, is that a percentage or a fixed amount?
It's sort of both. In the sense there's a fixed reimbursement rate right now that is based on the district's economic factors that they can calculate. But the actual reimbursement cost of how much of this project cost the the state will reimburse is based on what percentage of those costs are eligible for reimbursement. And in every project, there are certain costs that are not eligible for reimbursement. The biggest one being just the cost to construct. The state puts a cap on the cost of construction that they'll reimburse for, and it's $333 a square foot. The cost of construction these days is well over $400 a square foot. So we know right from the start that there are going to be certain costs that are not eligible for reimbursement. But the district's reimbursement rate is what, Aaron? 54%.
That's overall, right?
That's for the district, yes.
For each town,
For the region. It's a blended rate for the whole
Correct.
region for the
For
high
each
school
town,
project. But please don't apply that 54% to these numbers and think that the balance, that 46%, is going to be the district share. Because as I say, we know that they're going to be ineligible costs. And the effective reimbursement rate is generally significantly lower than the 54%. It may well be down below 40%, 35 to 40%, in that range.
Carl, can I add to that? Just sort of keep with the theme of having, if we were to go down the route of having a larger auditorium than the 460 student.
Yes, that's
agreed
another
upon
ineligible
If we were
cost.
to agree upon having a larger cafeteria than the agreed upon enrollment of 460 students, the state would, in theory, reimburse the 54% of the cafeteria that meets the enrollment standard of 460. The towns would have to come up with the rest of the funds to
Right.
to offset the oversized cafeteria, the oversized auditorium. So that's the general idea.
So there are copies of this around the room here, and now what we'd like to do is go from this format to, we probably have enough here just for 2 groups, I think, of
Probably have
folks.
enough of one. So many of you were part of it, I think we should just get together as one group.
I think 2, if I could, because there are a fair number of members here from the public that we could have one group back there where Melissa's sitting and one group here maybe, so that we could talk about your reaction to these, and we could focus on, the evaluation criteria, the pros and cons, or what we think of it.
Can I ask the Windsor residents to raise their hands? Okay, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Can it provide 5 people?
That's okay.
No.
No?
I'd like the Windsor residents to sit with everybody else.
Well, there's a lot, then you'll be well outnumbered. That's
Really well outnumbered too.
I think it's a little more equal then we get about 10 people at each table or so.
Doug, we're really trying to stay with the standard at all these meetings, even groups smaller than this, we've had at least 2 groups.
Okay, so let's take, we want to keep the time here, but yeah, at least 30 minutes here where we can talk back and forth and record reaction to what we've seen. We have some of those boards that we can put down and look a little closer at each one. So, can you grab that board?
This one?
That one there, the colored one, yeah? And take that other board and put it on the other table. Sure. Yeah. We can put it flat. Look at it.
Hey, which one was this? Right here. Oh, from Melissa. Hi, Melissa. Windsor, we got
last couple slides. Yeah, so the citizens, are here, not just Windsor residents. So that we could, yeah, taxpayers everywhere. Grab some water or some goodies. I should have, now's the time, somebody was good enough to bring those. You could partake, let's say, there. So, if you look at these little cartoons here, there are 2 that are addition renovations and 3 that are new construction in various configurations and locations. Those are the ones that we want to carry forward with a little more study, a little more development, and analyze against those criteria as to which we think are most
What we got?
the ones that right now, the criteria.
Do you have any costs? Do you have quite a background?
What's that? Maybe at least important at the bottom. Let us know what you think. Cost is right here. Nothing about cost is.
Why do you think that's the same?
Because number one is separate the new construction. Any one of these renovation options, shortest period, has some just because I am looking for the same position as new construction.
While construction. I understand it shouldn't be, I mean, I've been a teacher, okay? If something's going on outside, the kids are naturally going to look at a crane or whatever. I mean, I understand. But I think the time frame, number one. Number 2, we're building the academic
The groundwater was high, it was not a desirable place to build.
obviously the most efficient way of doing it rather than spread out layout of the present building.
Question, one question, what's the accessible?
You ended up with
An elevator.
sides
So I think,
so from just a land master planning.
I like the time frame. I like the less instruction to the
So
while
you can see
education
the
is going on. while
new options also exist in that category, and these are not as good.
The future operating costs to me are going to be less. I'm not an engineer, that's why I guess.
We'll be on the right track.
North, south.
The north-south deal.
Right. Yeah.
And, any of these are basically in the same money range. But, there's not a significant difference money-wise.
Potential, what's the
Here, I mean,
cost?
$3 million over 20 years. This is on the,
Operating cost.
Somebody in the school board already putting a lot of it.
I just think there's a lot of benefits to this one right here.
To this particular one, in comparison, say, what if you compare the street? Because they're all in the same.
They're all, I mean, this one here, the only thing that I do not care about is classroom space in east, west, south.
renovation project and new construction. And
This,
cost is
this
certainly a
one
factor,
here.
cost of all different categories is certainly a factor, but a lot of people find it useful to think about.
This one actually is the classroom.
Getting for your money.
Most south
Operating cost is
orientation.
one factor in that
I
regard.
mean,
But it needs to start.
this one here looks more
There's no reason to be.
and I'd like to be
And also, just temporary thing, put solar on the roof
I didn't go
too.
through all the.
We might as well have a lot of roof space
Well,
to
To implement a renovation.
They probably are similar classifications. They hold this option.
Yeah, I mean, I think,
The layout.
I think the panels
So the
should be
kids are in there
switched
somewhere.
around the roof. so
Oftentimes you have to rent portable classes.
Yeah.
And I think if we keep it
For a
compact
couple $100,000
now,
for, a couple of years. And it's
if
not.
we need to expand in the future,
That's money that
you've got some room there to
it's in that,
expand.
it's in the
If
project
we-
cost, but it's a percentage of that project
You know,
cost. You're not getting.
either one, I mean, these two are
If you build
relative.
temporary driveways,
Yeah.
I just think
which
this
we
one.
have to do in some of these.
Well, then you have a plan
new
of
construction,
construction,
a little bit more or
Lower
less than another,
Tax impact.
depending on where they're
Yeah,
situated.
the other option, you see, this option actually offers an easy step, get expanded in this direction.
Because now you're getting, although you're done with the size.
That option is a little tight of expansion, obviously, because of the size. So the only way for this option to grow will be into this direction, into the baseball field, like you said.
Yep.
And then this option here again will have to find a new expanded.
Well, no, and also in this addition renovation number 4 is two-story. Yeah.
Right. This one, is there a reason why
Yep. And stairs fully handicap accessible.
expand?
We could expand in that direction.
Even if we
We might lose part of the baseball field.
Well, in the final design, we can
If
adjust
we
things
did
a little bit.
one, there would be an
to-
elevator, but there'd be at least 3 lifts.
Yeah, I don't think
Vertical
we should be
lifts to
building,
deal with
thinking about
3 feet of change, in some
and what they
places.
want to do.
Some places
Don't they always have the option of going year to year to where they're?
Yeah, well, I think,
We need to make.
I can't see us having a
I mean, like, the day that we visited
So,
the new.
in new schools, we generally avoid lifts. We work out, like in the auditorium, a way to get from the main floor to the stage by a ramp or.
The way I
by a
understand
walkway.
the state reimbursement
Obviously, you
thing
get to the
now,
second floor.
you have to show having an area to expand.
We do.
Can be made
And-
accessible directly.
You know, so that's, but to,
Yes, it's the
I
existing.
don't think,
Oh, no,
as
they're all
as we expand the cost of the non-reimbursable areas,
Except the busing issue.
I think it's
They're all
gonna be.
two-story.
That works
Well,
out in an urban area.
$78 million.
Yeah, I was thinking that too.
If we say,
Probably will be.
oh,
School choice, a choice.
We just connected the projector, but
Transportation.
share with you the.
we've expanded the auditorium, we've expanded this, we've expanded this. The state isn't going to kick in on it. I just think it becomes a tough sell.
You gotta put it to a vote.
I mean, that's,
See that it's actually.
It's gotta pass the vote. I understand where Doug was coming from, he was a principal, high school principal, and he saves the hospital. But pragmatically, no.
60% are above $500,000.
These other 4 options put us in a better position to do that.
To say that
Yeah,
it's too small.
yeah,
There are
or
many
to think of
schools in
any more
Massachusetts,
regionalization,
the
yeah.
same size or smaller, that are successful.
that's.
And your current school is really successful.
Do you see Pittsfield residents want to pay for Taconic animal clinic? I don't see it. I don't see it.
Experience.
So the
Because it's that much.
What do you think?
I like it, I like the NCA, but I'd like to have it, that courtyard.
You like the courtyard?
You like the courtyard
Yeah.
closed?
Yeah, have it all closed.
Provides.
I was
But I do
wondering why-
like that.
Yeah, I do too. I like the courtyard
It's easier for
closed.
me to talk about. it.
Those classrooms set?
We did that every year.
That one?
Yeah.
Yes, that doesn't change.
And
We created courtyard.
Yeah.
You have more natural lighting to do that, because all the ones that are there now are all the way around. And you know, when we
I was
was
second
built,
class graduate.
oh, okay. So that was built for 800 people.
Yeah.
That was the original,
It-
Did we have
this-
1,200 at one time?
yes, we had up to, actually it was 1100.
Because, you know, I know people are saying, wait a minute, we housed 1,100 kids and now we can't fit 500 in.
But everything's packed, I mean, every classroom had
And the
30.
expectation, type of learning was different.
Oh, definitely.
Computers,
All criteria change.
electronics, science.
And the style of teaching is different now.
Thank God.
I know. It's not just standard lecture.
No, the idea of closing that, that's not a deal breaker for me. I think this basic.
Right.
So, but the problem.
Closing that in, what would change in the actual functional rooms?
Well, I think they were gonna have,
We just reconfigured this space.
All right.
like,
Okay,
meeting
so
area,
we'll
right?
just, that way.
It adds a little bit more circulation because obviously people will be another. And the size of courtyard, as I think we mentioned, was is probably a little,
I'm just gonna say no trees in the courtyard.
No?
yeah, well, once it,
All the lake and all.
Flaking.
Yeah. We don't mind cutting grass, but
oh yeah, I'll keep it all
the
done.
trees were.
Oh, this is the one?
Yeah,
But that's not one of the final contestants.
it was,
It's a point now.
Okay, she didn't collect on that.
yeah.
Okay.
But this is what we had is in saying, we
Yeah.
could reshape the building a little bit, create this corridor here, and form a courtyard.
And then you don't sacrifice anything with usable space?
No,
It does create.
What do you think, Charles?
There is, if you go to the
I
website.
think it's better.
Thing, yeah.
Yeah.
sure.
And like a more natural light with the windows
Yeah.
and stuff, you know.
And that courtyard is the size of the small.
Smaller one, yeah, I want
Oh,
to
okay,
mention
the one
that. This is
that-
more, the courtyard is smaller than the large one, but about the size of the small one.
Right, with that other aisle in there too, that also helps with evacuation if you had to.
Maybe.
That's where it gives you more opportunities to.
This.
Yeah. About that.
Yeah.
Could be, could be.
As you compare the two plans here, you
Yeah.
can see
Yeah.
this
I like
orientation.
this one.
That just seems like dead space to me.
It does.
You're facing the order of magnitude there.
You're talking about this one.
Yeah.
This one, yeah, sure.
Very dark parking lots.
Being there for all those years, I know.
What this is right now, and the cost right now.
Stuff that we have.
Right.
So,
You mean, kids escaping?
No, I actually just returned from there.
Yeah.
I worked there 36 years.
What's your position?
I was head custodian.
Oh, yeah.
So I kept up pretty good. Guys, they've always complimented me on keeping up.
Well, and so you're input
So
here.
I guess we're all set with
It was somebody would have kept up all the
Great point.
Right, right.
Less than, 450 square
The way
feet
you
building.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I want that basic, and then it's using this
Yeah.
for, no, I've always
For those
liked
things that are reimbursable.
the ones that set them way out to the back, I saw
Yeah.
no point in those whatsoever.
I was just thinking of plowing costs for having something really,
Yeah,
Building new roads.
moving everything, I know.
It's like if you build a house.
you know, this isn't going to set
We live
right.
close to the road.
Yeah.
Yes,
Right.
roads are.
It's nice to be way back in the woods, but
It makes it,
So,
little more that a passerby might see something and, you know, rather than having it
Give us
way back.
These guys have an interesting view that what's the district? You drive down the streets, you really.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can show you how this is presented, this is John pointed out. As you approach the building here, the main entrance is on display in all way it is. And so this is pretty good composition for the building. And even though this here is blank wall, if we put a music program here, we can put some glass on this wall. So we can shape this building so it will be
Aesthetics are
presented
important,
well.
you know, you don't want some ugly item, which is
Well,
We decided
important
that
to solve functional
2 years worth of work.
issues.
And we would expand if we expanded that way.
We will try to expand this way. There probably be something out here that depends what the size of expansion is. Right, we can't go back there. Yeah, even that starts affecting. It goes up. So expanding here probably not especially
Day
good.
on the phone, calling every resident.
And as you can see, there is a corridor right here that will continue right in this direction. And we're trying to plan it in a way that stays set to the side of the corridor that needed to continue. This is set up.
So this has a pretty good chance of passing, don't you think? Because it's original, it's not like, oh, back and turned it down, or whatever.
Yeah, no, I
The
mean,
winds are set.
that works, I mean, the vote
It's straight up.
That's why we tried Southern Berkshire with the
quote, building vote would be the same vote as the feasibility study.
Well, I guess you would call it popular.
Right, popular.
Majority rule. Yeah.
By the way, on this option, as we analyzed it, in terms of disruption you mentioned earlier, it is easier to build on this parking lot. We still have a diagram that showed that we could probably expand this parking a little bit over some first summertime. So we still have to, a little bit of temporary parking here for the school to function while this is being built. And we have to maintain access here to the existing school building, to the kitchen. So we have diagrams that show how this will be built.
segregated from students like you started with.
Yeah, I
So you
mean,
can build it with minimal disruption.
right, and not have, in the contractor doesn't have to wait for someone to do something.
We think this is probably, educate your 18 to 24 months.
18 to 24 months.
Yeah, renovation.
Well, 18 to 24 months will be to finish this building, so the school can move, and then there will be a little bit more time to release this and finish the field.
Because there will be issues of the waste, you
Yeah.
know, asbestos.
What that takes time to well, the kids will be there in September.
And you'll still be working on
Yes.
the old building.
We will start demolition of this building this summer.
Way more than that.
Okay, so 69.
And right now, what I don't even think that is, I think rail us are thinking, because I've seen that before. Based
No,
on just
Just,
what's
I don't know, how is
say.
PHS? I don't know, but
Yeah, PHS,
when
is
they have
Azure.
a mercury spill, she would go to Wahconah for 5 weeks, and she would come home and say,
I didn't even buy
"The building is terrible." And she was
Really? And she
But I
has
think-
an old PHS.
Not cast stones, but I think by maintenance is bad.
So this is years, last week's area.
Yeah, your building is well maintained.
Yeah,
Our building is well maintained, but if you talk
Yeah.
about Pittsfield,
yeah, yeah.
Yes.
there's an action that says the golden dome that you have.
What there is so the state.
Well,
It is historic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is
Yeah.
Oh my God, it
They
looks
used to only light it
magical.
up for home games, now they
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah, no,
It's magical. You went by. So
So
Charles, did you see anything? Did you think of anything?
Now, my only question.
Just because you lived it, you know?
But let's take this one, let's take the 75.
The crane will.
Now, in those costs, the demolition of the
Yes,
existing.
yes. Those, the second line, of course.
It's on everything.
That is everything. That
Turkey.
is furniture,
Yeah.
I thought that's what he just said at one of these buildings.
That's the FF.
That's what
Marlene Bauer,
yes, you got it. Furniture, fixtures, and we use abbreviations to.
No, we haven't.
Well, we'll be looking at options.
I've never seen that
Heating
individual
system.
heat pumps for every.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we can, and they're not.
I wish Stu was still here
Over
because.
here at the town office now, we just put in a solar system, we turned it on Monday, it's now working. And we're looking for bids now for heat pumps for that building over there. And when we get done with that and the electric change and installation, that'll be a zero in that building.
So you
much.
circulate chilled water, you take the chilled water out of the ground, or you take the water out of the
We're
ground.
taking
No, this is air.
We're taking out.
This is air source heat pumps.
okay, you're talking air.
Air source heat pumps.
Okay,
The
not
the geo you could do in your building.
Now, the firehouse, they could take water out of the pump
Yeah,
and run it through a heat pump system.
yeah.
I just think when you get into,
Go behind her.
obviously we'll look at it here, when you get into 120,000 square foot
It's the
building.
size of the building that
Takes a lot
we
of-
will need to do an analysis.
It'll take a lot of fuel from whatever source.
I was involved in Clark Harbor when I built the building up at home before. We had a square feet, but we used geothermal.
Geothermal.
It was open loop geothermal. We ran it through a chill, so we kicked the cold water and chill it.
Do you use it just for air conditioning or you?
No, we did it all there. But it went, at the time, it was recent also. So we hundreds of feet.
The one challenge I was saying is the.
And they ended up with problems where they were, some wells were starving because when we started pumping
Air
the
source
water,
is better. Air source is
it sucks out the water table everywhere.
So, there. They're thinking about different areas.
Right.
The last 3 years, about 7 really is.
Well, I mean, you can see.
For the age of the building.
The first year, we turned the gas, we called it, what the heck happened? We're not spending the Yeah.
I know that
It's spread out.
Yeah, it is.
It
So
is. There's a
this,
lot of exterior wall
Yeah,
surface.
yeah.
in those old
And not
original
Fisher,
windows
not
are not housing at all.
Yeah, the windows still.
Right.
Tons of glass on the outside,
Yeah.
it's normal size
I know.
glass, so you're losing a lot of.
as a member of the community, he also wants us to study wood pellet.
Yeah, with pellets.
well, that's renewable.
It's renewable, I mean, normally gas.
I don't think, I know so many people that live in this house.
Yeah.
Just their allergies, flare out, can't breathe.
Maybe there's something new, I don't know.
Commercial level, but you still exhaust, the greenhouse.
Yes, it's still creating a lot of gas.
You're burning wood.
I swear by the gas, gas heat, that's what we put it in.
But even that.
And it's funny, it's funny to watch the.
Like over here, it's oil fired, and it'll still leave that for backup force because there's those times when the coefficient, even with air source heat pumps, in Windsor, when it gets to be 24. They won't work well, and so then the oil burner, it's always 15 degrees cold.
You can feel the chill.
Yeah, you can. It's natural air conditioning in the summer.
Yeah, definitely.
We built that building assuming a very large population.
Well,
Yeah.
How are you guys feeling about starting?
Size of it.
Yeah, I know that was.
I thought, when we did the original walkthrough, I thought they said the auditorium was substantially sized as well as accessibility for handicap.
There's 635 seats, because I counted.
Okay.
It takes some of that. So I know the town of Darlington loves to have a place they can have a town meeting
Sure.
number,
Yeah.
you know? So I think they would back trying to keep that size.
But do you make it larger?
We have 550 right now. We have oversized auditorium in the project. But that's
Project is bigger?
it's likely non-reimbursable cost.
Right.
So this auditorium is bigger?
Up to
Probably in the high threes.
350 or
Yeah, it's
something.
not all student.
Yes, that's the number.
And it's too bad. I mean, if you see the functions that we have,
Right,
we
right.
have to place on certain events.
Right.
And even the town meetings.
I was gonna say, yeah, when they put out a flyer.
But
There's
they say
too
you can
much
have more than
impact on the.
one day if you want.
And, I mean,
Oh,
hopefully,
Yeah.
I don't mind building a bigger auditorium and have the town pay. I just hope it doesn't come into that.
Yeah.
Once that idea is out there, that 6 towns are paying
For Dalton's
for Dalton.
town meeting.
Dalton. I mean,
That's what they'll-
I know we all use it for the musicals and, Charlie Bradshaw's senior day or whatever, you know.
But you believe that the 6 towns will only pay for the number of children in the school.
Right,
It's not total, so you're only paying that percentage.
Right.
Something, yeah.
And,
10% of the,
you know,
you
so,
would pay 10%.
I mean, I don't think it's going to become
Right.
a big issue. But I don't think we want to then say, oh, okay, we can talk them in the oversized auditorium, we can talk them in the oversized cafeteria, we can talk them in the oversized space. I don't think we ought to push our luck too far. Because the auditorium, even though it's oversized according to the case, we're not building it bigger than what
No, I
we
don't think
currently
it was. I
have.
thought it was
And I think that's a selling point right there on the oversized. They're saying, we're gonna have the same size auditorium.
It's actually
There's
small.
not enough room.
Well, okay,
It's smaller, the new one is just.
Well, that's true, I mean, I actually work with
And
the
handicap,
Appalachians
yeah.
and making sets and stuff, and it is tight,
Right.
you know. But I'll tell you, when open space is hard to sell, you know, well, you know, we're just gonna have some more open space at $400
Yeah,
a square foot. That's tough, because I noticed that when I went into Nessic the first time, that we had all those custodians over there to help move stuff. And I said, okay, where's your storage? And, yeah, I mean, that was,
The extra storage.
and that's how we can get the building costs down by not having that, but it is important for us maintenance guys. And I'm not saying we need a huge place with drill presses
Gotta
and
have a place.
stuff, but you gotta have.
Change the size of the
Is that right?
cafeteria is about 1,100 square feet.
Yeah, it's MSBA thing.
That big.
Well, it's formula, so it's, yes, you get limited. No, it's not a grossing factor, it's actually built
The reality is you
into
might
the
end up going 4.
formula into the
Kept it at
asset.
3, you just go to
So storage,
Speaking of formulas, I remember this was discussed once before, I was at a town meeting regarding the school budget.
The same with the
That all
other now,
different
we've
town
sized it
schools
as-
are not assessed at so much per head.
The
But
state's
it depends on your town list, and there's a formula, and so Windsor actually pays more per head for students than some
Well,
other
yeah,
towns.
because it's
Explain that.
the state basic level thing there, it shifts it, and it's nothing that the school district can do.
But I mean, how and why?
There's 2 factors. And
Oh, right.
this is the operating budget, not the capital budget.
Okay.
Assessed to different.
Capital
Yeah.
budget.
Just
Like,
call.
like, yeah. I mean, everybody's, yeah.
So,
The
yeah.
operating budget,
And usually that's nice hard finishes because they're easy to clean, so you
the
get good
state
tile, that's
then
expensive
will,
flooring.
has a formula of their
Or
own,
something.
based upon
Or
the
terrazzo or
wealth
whatever.
of the residents,
So-
income,
Oh, there you go.
It's not the
valuation
cheapest
properties.
fish to build.
And then it'll say for their number of children, foundation, what they call foundation, the number of children that they have, based upon these factors,
We're a lot smaller than we
income
were
and
20 years
valuation
Right,
of real estate, growth factors,
We
inflation.
definitely keep that in.
They say Windsor
Is more
should pay
able.
X.
Right.
So that's
All it
the,
takes is one wealthy family to do
right, so
it.
that's the basis of it, but
Going
then
rate right
our
now, which is
formula says, we use a 5-year rolling
Somewhere in
average,
that,
so
it's
you may
anticipated
have
that
30
we
kids
make
this
good
year or
choices
80
and
kids
put in materials that
next
are long
year,
lasting.
so it'll average it out to
Low
kind of help with
And
those
those aren't always the cheapest.
fluctuations.
Well, the other thing that I want to make
So we use a 5-year rolling average
Years to the long term.
for
The
the
average.
the additional transportation.
by the end of next year,
Yep.
we will
Assessments.
have to be
So
bigger.
there's
This
a
is
couple
by
of
speed
factors that
internet.
go into it.
All of them.
If for the budget, the state minimum was exactly what the budget was, that's, you
Was it
don't
right?
pay that.
First down to come up in December,
It's very low.
followed by Row, and then the rest of these towns will follow out through
So
that.
now we started conversation looking at the new
Becca's gonna be the last one.
Yeah,
Let's
we
keep
changed
right
it.
over the renovations.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think the renovation is,
The middle of all these towns.
personally, I don't think it's
It's gonna be 10 years.
viable. I don't think it's cost efficient.
Actually, we do take,
And-
they've already taken that towards to the building committee, but.
So, given that.
I mean, you're talking years, number one, if you're just doing all that.
High
Okay?
speed.
This one, you're working around school schedules and everything.
Subsidy program for any kids.
I don't think, I just don't think it's worth
Okay, so we make sure everybody.
And
I agree, when we first did that walkthrough, I was like, oh, I hope they can save, you know, why reinvent the wheel, why, you know? And I looked at
Uxbridge.
yeah.
Probably.
Because we've
We
only
went
got
to
3
school there
students
and
in
taught
this
there.
class.
Maybe we could sell that section.
Only got
Sell bricks.
Well, it's still returning.
Yeah, but then they might throw them at the.
Oh dear.
Maybe that's not the order.
screens, and I got cameras
Yeah,
and.
we're selling, selling a number of bricks. They-
Stuff that people have to figure.
Melissa, what a good thing would be to take something from old Wahconah
Yeah.
and put it in the school.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Save your kind of operation.
Well, yeah, whatever, something like that, you know, that kind of commemorates, because that was a
there
great
is, Marty,
building.
there is going to be this faction out there
Yeah.
that says,
So you make those.
Save
run stand every hour.
save Wahconah.
Those that are-
At all costs.
Yeah, or, you know, if you can't save the academic wing, give us the plan where you save the auditorium. And then add.
And we do have it, which is this one.
Yeah, yeah, I know.
And it is also
Oh, Jeff Reardon.
Yeah, you got it. You gotta be down with phones. Yeah.
You
We have a
know,
lot of time.
Yeah, when you have this.
Grab some
What we do, Wahconah.
I thought we were just gonna sit in.
Oh, no. They You know, I like it. Yeah, there is, because the funds are drying up.
Chairs around, focus for 5 minutes. Yeah, we want to wrap up here. We said we'd be through about this time, so we want to stick to our schedule. We also need to wrap up the Tulsa to do it again tonight, too, so. This is just to share for the benefit of the people who weren't at our table, at the other table, as to what we came up with and talked about it. we focused mainly on what's important and the criteria of value. And we didn't get too specific about which of the options were the best at this point in time yet, but the things that were important as advice to us in the building committee moving forward.
Sure.
Operating costs, when we talk about cost, we should certainly calculate this before we're done with this phase to understand the difference. There was another one about cost down here too. We need to think about reimbursement, try to do some kind of estimate of what's reimbursable in each of these options, and so that we could calculate what the district's cost ultimately would be once you back out the state's reimbursement. And then sort of in that same line that it's not just cost, it's value that's important. Came out a couple times, and long-term value meaning having, you know, good materials that are long-lasting and low maintenance, having good systems that are energy efficient and save in operating costs. And so when we think about comparing, particularly obviously renovation versus new, value is an important part of the proposition, not just purely cost. And then the other thing, there was agreement about the expansion, but also thinking of it as flexibility needs to be important in whichever option is looked at. Whether it's to accommodate more students or just to be flexible internally too. Those were important criteria that we identified. Vladimir? Sure.
In our group, we concentrated on discussing actual options and alternates here, and
Is there a winner?
of course. We already know what we're designing, we know which option everybody likes. It's NC 2A1, which is a new construction with a courtyard option. And the reason everyone concentrated and thought of that as the best solution was because it's efficient, it's effective, it provided opportunities for expansion, and everybody liked the idea that it's 2 stories, so it's compact footprint. It's a good way to organize the building and distribute the students and traffic through the school. That's another reason why everyone liked the courtyard option, because first of all it provides a little bit better security for the school, but also provides a better circulation through the school by the students and staff. So that's the option that everybody liked. We did look at the renovation options, and the idea of value came up there as well, that it's not extremely good value as a solution for the current problems, so that's why those got dismissed as something.
Well, I think one of the other big factors was the disruption to the school that a renovation would have. And no length of time.
This particular option, we talked a little bit about site phasing, construction phasing, and how this building can be built with minimum disruption to the existing school building and keeping construction away from the occupied school. So least disruption as well. Well, we did talk about non-reimbursable costs and concerns, and that affects the size of the auditorium, the size of the cafeteria, and how those items will be assessed as we move forward through this project. And of course, we did talk about zero net building as a concept, as how we move into the future, what environmental valuable solutions we can provide here. So that's a general summary of the discussion.
Well, thank you very much for all your contributions. We appreciate that. We're not done here yet. Yes.
I have a couple of comments I'd like to just leave you with.
Okay.
We've been working for the last 10 years to bring high-speed internet to all these hill towns. Every town in the district will have fiber optic high-speed internet to the house by the end of next year.
Great.
Every student will have access to high-speed internet. What does that mean from your educational programs, and what does that mean in terms of building design?
Yeah.
Because if we have high-speed internet, there's no reason you need large classrooms. If you have 3 kids that want to take French, and only 3 kids, you can hire a teacher in France to teach French, and you don't need a full-time teacher. And if you have a lot of small classrooms with large screens and cameras, you can do a lot. There's no limit to the number of programs. There's no limit to the number of programs you can offer, and it can become a magnet for the area for people transitioning in because they can get programs at this school that they can't get anyplace else. So I'd like to see that incorporated into the design.
Thank you.
And thinking about both the academic programs for the school and the building design.
Thank you.
Good point, thank you.
So this isn't the last time you'll see us process either. As we said, this step is geared towards narrowing down these options to 1 in September. In the fall, we'll have another series of these kind of community meetings to get more input as we advance that design before finalizing that in February. And then, you know, at that point, there'll be many more meetings in many varied sort of formats, so that at that point it's more about getting out the vote and getting support for the project. Right now it truly is about getting input into the project in the design and the thinking about it. So thank you very much for participating. We need to move on to get to tonight. Thank you very much.